Again, I'm here with Curt Welling, who is a senior fellow at Dartmouth Tuck Business School. And Curt, you've had an incredible career, 25 years in investment banking. You rose through the ranks at First Boston. You did incredibly well at Bear Stearns. And then you went over to Societe Generale and handled the merger between Societe Generale and Cowen. What do you think it takes somebody to essentially follow in your footsteps, if you will?
Well, I'm not sure I'd advocate anybody following in my footsteps. I think looking for places where there is a dynamic of change as an indication of where opportunity is going to be created is one thing I would tell people to look for. I think at some level you have to have sort of the foot on the brake and the foot on the accelerator. You know, you have to make sure that you're learning the fundamentals, that you're not disruptively aggressive or ambitious and so on, but you also have to figure out how and when and where you can take risks professionally.
So Curt, you worked at Bear Stearns, and Bear Stearns was very dedicated to corporate philanthropy. What are your views on that? Do you feel like companies are better at that today or worse? Do you think they should be more involved? What are your thoughts?
Corporate philanthropy is a tricky thing because on the one hand there are people who believe that corporations shouldn't be giving money away, that it's really the shareholders' money and therefore it should be given to the shareholders and the shareholders should be deciding where it goes in society. But a more nuanced and evolved view of this, I think, would say, as corporations are increasingly acknowledging this changing nature of their role in society, that corporate philanthropy is a way of acknowledging all of their stakeholders, of spreading the impact of the corporation across a wider range of social activities. And so a lot of work has been done recently on thinking about corporate philanthropy in the context of the mission of the company, and trying to find ways where those two things can be brought together. So it is, Mike Porter has done a lot of work on this at Harvard, so that you bring the strategy of the company in line with its sustainability and its corporate philanthropy activities, and one reinforces the other. Nike is a great example of that. Nike has made most of its innovation activities focus on things like improvements in the labor conditions, improvements in the quality of the materials to reduce the environmental impact of them, as well as finding new ways to change their processes so they're having smaller, innovative, smaller environmental impact. And their whole perspective is not only that's the right thing to do, but increasingly consumers will differentiate Nike on the basis of the quality of their sustainability activities. And there's some reason to think that's happening. I wouldn't overstate it, but there is some reason to think that's happening.
When I interview a lot of folks, they talk about giving back through various charities and what have you. You actually didn't just give back, you went to work for AmeriCares, which is a phenomenal institution. While at AmeriCares, you distributed over $9 billion. Tell us a little bit about what the experience was like, and what motivated you and what you've learned from that experience.
My parents were great role models, my wife's family. So we sort of grew up with this idea that one of the things you do if you're a successful person is you participate in your community in some way. And fairly early in my career here in New York, I'd gotten involved in a number of nonprofit organizations, and I was the chair of the board of a great children's services and adoption organization called Spence Chapin. And I remember thinking, gee, it would be great if at some point in my career this was my day job, and the business and finance stuff was an avocation. And so that seed was planted, and I began to develop this idea that I'd like to have a second career in a mission-driven organization. And the problem with having these things on your life list is when you get to a certain age, you either have to start doing them or you have to start crossing them off, right? So I've crossed a few off. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be president of the United States. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be a U.S. senator. Yeah. I'm not going to invent some drug which is going to cure some pandemic. But often I think people find these things have to be catalyzed, and for me the catalyst was 9/11 in 2001. And that was such a obviously dramatic, jarring moment of reflection that I said, look, if you're going to do this, why wouldn't you do it now?
Sure. Why AmeriCares, though? There are a lot of organizations out there. How did you select those folks?
So I wanted to find an organization where my management skills and strategic capability and fundraising ability and so on would make a difference, and I could learn the subject matter. And through a series of, now I think, wonderful coincidences, I happened to be identified by a board member at AmeriCares right at the time that they were looking to transition from their founder. And founder transitions are unique and beautiful things. Typically a founder stays on a little bit too long, doesn't create the infrastructure that's going to be required to scale the organization to the next level, maybe is a little bit closed-minded about strategy, maybe doesn't to share and distribute decision-making capability, and so on. And I'd done founder transitions in the securities business. I understood how that worked, and they're actually quite formulaic. Mm-hmm. And the more I learned about AmeriCare's mission, which is emergency response and global public health, particularly in the distribution of medicines and medical supplies in 90 countries around the world, I thought, gee, this is something that would be fun to learn about, is a great mission where there's enormous leverage in terms of your ability to help. And I think I can help them with this difficult transition from the culture of a founder to a more institutionalized business.
In terms of the charitable organizations out there, there's been a few that are sort of pushing the limits in terms of overcompensation. 501c3 organizations, it's great to have them. Some are very charitable. Robin Hood Foundation is great. What you guys are doing is great. But do you see some potential conflicts in terms of all the money that these folks are raising and how they go about distributing that money?
It's a topic that I care a lot about, and one of the topics that I'm exploring in the MBA curriculum at Tuck. Start with the idea that the nonprofit sector in the United States, philanthropy sector, is $350 billion. It's about 6 to 8% of GDP. Charitable activities are. So it's a huge sector, and it runs the spectrum from universities and colleges to churches to social services to advocacy organizations to taking good care of animals. I mean, there's an enormously wide spectrum. So it's very hard to generalize. There is a popular feeling that somehow management teams or executive teams in the nonprofit world shouldn't be paid too much, which is sort of superficial and simplistic at a minimum. And in fact, there is some more enlightened work that's been done recently that says in the absence of a for-profit marketplace which enforces accountability based on returns, what we should be doing is figuring out a way to reward the most successful nonprofit organizations by allowing them to consolidate and scale. And if you're going to do that, it means attracting the very best people, not just the best people in a particular field, but the best people generally. And marketplaces work. You know, you're not going to attract the best people solely on the basis of the reward that they get in their souls. You're going to have to pay people. And so if you're trying to hire a crackerjack finance person, you're competing with everybody out there who's looking for chief financial officers. Now, having said all that, one of the big differences between the nonprofit world and the for-profit world is the for-profit world is the culture of the marketplace, and the nonprofit world is the culture of the mission. And so a lot of emotion is involved in thinking about how nonprofit organizations need to configure themselves, how they should be accountable, to whom they should be accountable, and so on. So I think a lot of the popular press stuff which has been written about excess payment, excess compensation, inefficiency, and so on is superficial. There are certainly abuses, and some of the abuses have been quite spectacular. You can go back to the United Way scandal and some of the trouble that the American Red Cross got into after Hurricane Katrina with respect to the use of donor money. But as a general matter, the problem of nonprofits is not that people are being paid too much, it's that they're not being paid enough to ensure that you're getting the very best people to work in the most important organizations.
I feel like we live in a world today where everybody is sort of out for themselves. And I mean in terms of businesses, which used to have pensions, which now pass that on to the individual to sort of manage their lives, to our government, where everybody's sitting there trying to essentially get votes, and will do whatever's necessary to get votes. And as a result, some of our politicians are, to me anyway, not the most desirable. Do you agree with that?
There has certainly been a rise in the social permission to indulge in self-interest, particularly in the United States. As you get into these very difficult questions, so my course I'm teaching a session on the subprime mortgage market meltdown. And depending on where your political stripes are, you either think that's the result of avarice and greed on Wall Street, or you think that's the result of a failed political process, or you think it's the result of failed regulation. And the reality is, when you sort out who has primary responsibility for what, if you're going to lay responsibility for that anywhere, at least a significant amount of responsibility has to be laid with the government for the quality of the regulations that were put in place. The marketplace behaves the way the marketplace behaves. Capital markets are essentially morally agnostic. It's the actors who are playing and the size of the playing field and the rules that shape the play that determine what's permissible and what's not. So you need enlightened regulators, and one of the problems with that is you had people in Wall Street who were smarter and much more numerous than anybody regulating them. Well, that's a bad system. So that system has to be dealt with.
Okay, you're currently at Tuck teaching, and I'm sure you're having a great time doing that. And I'm sure kids all the time are saying, you know, Curt, what are your words of advice?
Well, first of all, I don't have any magic prescription for what it takes to be successful. The old truths are still the old truths, right? Learn, work hard, be grateful that you're given the opportunity to learn and work hard. Look for places where there's a dynamic of change at the margin. If you're thinking about going to work for a company that's done the same thing for 30 or 40 years or longer, you might at least want to ask yourself how much longer they're going to be able to keep doing that, and at least be a little skeptical of how they're going to compete at the margin. So what are they doing to stay relevant? If you're doing the same thing that you've been doing for 30 or 40 years and you haven't adjusted at the margin, you're sort of not paying attention.
Again, I'm here with Curt Welling, and Curt, you've had a fascinating career from Wall Street to charitable work. Now you're back in academia, and all I can say is you've had an amazing career. People are going to learn a ton from this video and cannot thank you enough.
Thanks, Scotty. It's been great to be with you.